All right, welcome back to the next episode of my NHL Deep Dive series. Today we are talking about the Utah Hockey Club. And before this video starts, I will 100% call them the Arizona Coyotes at some point in this video. It's just going to happen. I just need to get that out of the way. Maybe I'll get through it perfectly. I don't know, but I'm just putting that out there. I'm going to screw that up at some point today. It's the way it is. But technically Utah is a brand new franchise. It's not a relocation team. It is it's not an expansion team, but it's like a new franchise. So I know I'm going to screw that up. Just don't come after me in the comments because it's going to happen. But yeah, Utah is up next, and Utah had a very interesting offseason because like finally the handcuffs of not having any money were taken off this front office, and they were able to be pretty aggressive. So yeah, they did quite a lot. And I'm excited to talk about them. I think they're going to be a fun team to watch, and not just because they're a new team, but because I think they have some good young pieces who could really break out. This is one of those very similar to when I talked about Minnesota, where I think their range of outcomes is fairly decent. And I think a lot of the negative aspects of the last couple of years for this core have been from playing in the turbulence of Arizona. So now that they got a bit more stability, maybe that'll help kind of breed consistency in the players, but we'll see. But we'll dive into the offseason moves first, as we always do. And talking about the forward core, Kevin Stenlund for Travis Boyd are the only real additions and subtractions on offense. I guess you can throw Connor Geekie in there if you think he's going to play this year. Maybe he does. I don't know. We'll talk about that when we get to Tampa Bay. But they did lose Connor Geekie, I guess. I said this core is pretty unchanged. Like Kevin Stenlund and Travis Boyd are both just kind of guys. I'd probably lean Kevin Stenlund as the better player, but like they're both just like not everyday like extra forwards. So I'm not going to say the group's upgraded or downgraded because of that. But I like Kevin Stenlund. I also like Travis Boyd. But they're both just fine. It's pretty much a wash up front. They didn't change much. This offense is virtually the same as it was last year. Defensively is where this team gets interesting. They go out and they add John Moreno. They go out and add Ian Cole, and they go trade for Mikhail Sergachev, which was the big move that this team made. They lose Travis Dermott, who's really fallen off a cliff over the last couple of years. He was somebody that I really liked a couple years ago, and then I don't know what happened to Travis Dermott. Josh Brown, who's one of the worst players in the NHL, and JJ Moser, who I like, but again, is not anything significant. Clearly, this is an upgraded defensive core. Ian Cole is better than all three of those players, probably. Maybe you can make a case that JJ Moser is like a similar type of player, but like John Moreno and Mikhail Sergachev are easily upgrades over everybody else. And in that, they stayed the same. So overall, I think it was a solid offseason. They improved this blue line. I think that was the biggest need on the I almost said Arizona, on Utah. And the offense really wasn't a huge concern. They have enough young guys coming up that I think they can kind of just run it back. But defensively was where the biggest issues were on this team, and they went out and they aggressively solved those problems. But let's dive into the forward core. So starting off this forward core, I have them ranked 18th in the NHL. And this is one of those teams where like their overall score is lower than you'd probably think it would be because of where their grades are, but because we're getting into the point in the rankings now where like you're going to have like a top 10 team in one category, but a team that's like 20th in another. So it's just the way it grades out is weird, but you'll notice that kind of at this point because we've kind of gone through all the really bad teams now, and now we're getting into the ones where they might have one group that's really good, but like other parts of their team aren't. Or you'll have teams like Utah where all their groups kind of grade out to be pretty well around the same mark, but they just drop because they don't have one that significantly sticks out. So I just wanted to throw that out there because so many get questions about why this team is this low because none of their ranks are 23rd or 22nd or whatever we are. Anyway, let's talk about the forward core, starting with Clayton Keller. Clayton Keller, again, is one of those players who's extremely underrated because of where he played. And I think his point totals have been disappointing for people who don't watch or who didn't watch Arizona games the last couple of years. You might take a look at his point totals and be like, well, what's the, like, he's good, but like, what's the hype about? And it's just, a lot of it has to do with his underlyings. His play driving's been very good. His transition game is phenomenal. His defensive game is underrated. He's lacked that true number one center to help facilitate offense from a point standpoint. And I really hope that Logan Cooley can become that person. And obviously, as of right now, Daily Faceoff doesn't have them playing together. Or at least at the time that I made the graphic. I don't know if it's changed over the last like couple days, but as of the time I made this, Logan Cooley was not on his line, which is fine. Like, I think Barrett Hayden's like a fine center for them. I think they fit. Like, the chemistry is great. Barrett Hayden's just not the player. Like, I'd rather them have a higher elite center than Barrett Hayden on that line. Nick Schmaltz is really good. Nick Schmaltz is somebody who I've fantasy traded to a bunch of teams pretty much every deadline for the last two deadlines. Because Nick Schmaltz is, again, one of those players who's super underrated. I figure I might as well talk about him now because we're talking about Clayton Keller's line mates. And yeah, I think Nick Schmaltz is just, he's kind of the perfect, like, all-around kind of guy. He can do everything really well. He reminds me a lot of, like, maybe not in play style, but just kind of in utility as, like, a prime Brandon Gallagher, where he's just good at, like, everything. But he's not, like, great at something, if that makes sense. Obviously their play styles are different, but like in that sense of like in value sense, like he's just kind of good at everything. Similar to kind of Clayton Keller, honestly. Like, Clayton Keller doesn't have a ton of holes in his game. And I think if you can get him, like if Logan Cooley can become that number one center that we think he should be, like you're looking at Clayton Keller maybe becoming like a 100-point player. If he can get that center, right? Like that's what he's missing to elevate himself to that level. And there was a lot of trade rumors with him a couple years ago. It would have been kind of cool to see him play with like a true elite center if somebody could have made a move for him. Obviously it didn't happen. And now Utah has the means to go grow that, right? Like there's not the financial excuse anymore. So he's somebody I'm really looking forward to watching over the next like 2 or 3 years to see what Utah does to put him in a position for success. And I think one of those key pieces is going to be Dylan Guenther, who I have as a B- right now, which you'll see with a lot of the players kind of in his age group. That seems to be kind of where a lot of them fell in because they'd have like one very good year, but that's been it, right? It's just been the 1 year. So I need to see another year before I can move him up or down, really. That's the whole thing. So it's not like I'm saying that he's like a fringe middle six player or whatever. It's more that he's in that group where he could move up into the top this year, or he could stay where he is depending on the kind of season he has. I expect Dylan Guenther to have a very good season. He's kind of my like fantasy sleeper pick, where I think if you can get him late in the fantasy draft, there's a ton of upside with Dylan Guenther because of the fact that he's going to get power play time. They just upgraded their D with guys like Mikhail Sergachev, who are very offensive. He's going to be on a team that's going to want to try to create offense because it's a new franchise. They seem to want to be flashy. Dylan Guenther could be a very good like late steal in a fantasy league. So especially if you heavily value points, I think Guenther could be like a very strong pick late in a draft. So there you go. That's my little fantasy highlight for you. Dylan Guenther's super fun. I mean, anybody who's watched him play understands that he's extremely fun to watch. And I think if he can shore up some of the raw areas in his game, he could become a super good player too. And I think there's that balance there. Dylan Guenther seems like, I mean, I have no worries about Dylan Guenther at all. Same with Logan Cooley. I mean, I was super high on Cooley out of the draft. Like I had him battling with Shane Wright for first overall pretty much all year. Now, I mean, I'm clearly higher on him than I am on Shane Wright, but again, like he's kind of the big thing, right? Like, is this the year that he had a very strong rookie season. Let's see if he can take another step, right? Like he's going to have the line mates. I mean, Lawson Krause and Dylan Guenther are a really fun second line. And I think if you can develop him and Guenther at the same time and get them to kind of hit their peaks together, which seems to be the plan, that could be a really potent 1-2. And then as Keller kind of hits that roof and starts to kind of decline, you can kind of replace him with those two as being the two best players on your team. I really like the core. I think the team itself is pretty well rounded. If you guys have been following me for a while, I made a post about Michael Kirkoni beginning in the last offseason, saying that he could be a really good, fun bottom six breakout player. Turns out I was right. Shout out to analytics, baby. That's the magic. Yeah, I mean, Alex Kerfoot's fun. Josh Doan, I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit because he's got a D rating, and people are going to freak out because it was like, well, he was 9 points in 11 games. Yeah, he played 11 games, right? Like, the cutoff to be a prospect is 10. Like, he played one game above that level, and he was good enough to not be a D- player for me, basically, right? So, that's why he's a D. That's actually like a very positive thing that I'm trying to say about him because he's played 11 career games, and I already have him as a D player. So, don't come after me. Both former Coyotes and Utah Hockey Club fans. I like Josh Doan. He looked very good, but he played 11 games. So he's not a prospect based on my criteria for what gets a P rating for a player because he played more than 10 games. There you go. He gets a D. That's a strong rating. Actually, some prospects I can go up to 30. So, you know, it's good. I like him. Yeah, other than that, I mean, like, the bottom six is very sturdy. I think it's a good, like, reliable bottom six. There's nobody in here outside of Josh Doan that I look at and I'm like, I'm really excited to watch him play, right? Like, I'm not going out of my way to, like, watch Nick Bukestad and Alex Kerfoot, but they're great players, right? Like, they're good. Well, not great, but like they're strong players for your bottom six. Is what I'm trying to say. There's not really a lot of holes on this team. I think it's a matter of just development at this point, right? It's a matter of just kind of continuing to get the youth movement to continue here. Keep trying to slide in, young picks. Keep hitting in the draft. And yeah, I mean, if you can continue to build out this core the way they have been, Utah could be very strong. And I thought Arizona was going to be pretty strong last year too. So having another year of that, having it in this new energetic building that's going to be fired up and full and not 5,000 people is going to help this team. And I think you saw a lot of, especially later in the season when this team started to go on those like massive losing streaks, you saw kind of the energy gets sucked out of this team because there was the threat of moving, there was the relocation, there's the stadium, the arena, and everything was just kind of a joke and nobody knew what was happening. So I think getting that monkey off their back is definitely going to help this team generate a lot more excitement from the players and the fans, obviously, but the players are going to feed off that. And that's going to be a big piece of this team. So yeah, I like this offense. I think it's pretty good. It's just below the middle of the pack for me in the NHL, and I think it could be pretty much above that line at the end of the season if guys like Gunther and Cooley can develop. And Josh Doan. Let's not forget about him. So yeah, that's the offense. I like it. I think it's strong. I think, there's obviously a lot of question marks in terms of development, but I think there's a lot of potential there for this to be a very good unit by the end of the season and going into next summer. So defensively is a super interesting unit. This might be the most intriguing unit maybe in the NHL. They're tied for 12th. There's a bunch of teams that are tied for 12th, actually. I was kind of surprised when I ended up doing the rankings. Arizona, I think, is the most intriguing out of all of them. I'd probably have them the lowest or one of the lowest of those teams. I think there's like 5 teams tied for 12th. So like of that group, I'd probably have them closer to like 16 or 17th in the league. But because the point total, the way that I do the points, they tied. It's the math worked out that they were all tied. But yeah, so this unit would be, I think, closer to like 16 or 17. But I think it's super interesting. The most intriguing part is Mikhail Sergachev, because there's been this debate amongst Canadiens fans and Lightning fans and just people in the NHL in general of whether or not Mikhail Sergachev is a true number one defenseman. I'm of the mind that he's a very good number two. Because that's all we've seen from him, right? Like, we haven't seen him have to be that true number one guy, like an anchor blue liner for a team ever. And he's going to have to do that this year, right? Because as much as I really like Sean Durzi, who we'll talk about in a second, Sean Durzi is not a number one defenseman. And I think that's pretty evident as of right now. So Mikhail Sergachev is really the big question mark. And if he can develop into that guy who can play, who can play in the mid-20s minute-wise as your number one guy against the hardest competition, and also, eat minutes offensively, eat minutes on the power play, on the penalty kill, as the true number one guy. Because, like, he did a lot of that in Tampa Bay, but he did a lot of that behind Victor Hedman. So, and even around that, like the Lightning blue line, right? Like, you also had McDonough there during the Cup years. You had Eric Chernak there. You had a lot of those kind of guys who could cover up a lot of those things. And I think Arizona, there you go, I did it. I think Utah has a lot of those guys, like those secondary guys, like the McDonoughs and the Chernaks, maybe not to that level, but similar type of players. They just don't have anybody above them. So for me, this is a real prove-it year for Mikhail Sergachev, who I like, but I don't know if I like him as my true number one defenseman. We're going to find out. Like, this is kind of a sink or swim year for him. And they moved out some pretty significant assets to get him. So obviously, Utah's high on him. And I like the bet. Like, I think of the defensemen they could have made that offer for that were unproven, Sergachev's probably the best one that they could, like, give him a shot. So we'll see. Sean Durzi, again, just super, super underrated. Like, if you haven't been watching Sean Durzi the last couple of years, especially last year, you're missing out, man. Like, he's so much fun. Just a real strong defenseman, somebody who can play offensively, who can throw in tough minutes. He really can kind of do it all. I think that's kind of a theme on this blue line, right? Like, Valimaki and Moreno are kind of similar to that, right? Like, guys you can just throw it in any situation, feel pretty confident, and I don't know if they have, like, the similar super high-end offensive upside, but I don't feel, like, terrible about doing it. And you have Ian Cole, who's kind of your stay-at-home, like, Joel Edmondson type. I just talked about Joel Edmondson last video. So it's like, he's not, great, but he's somebody that you can throw out and feel okay about. I think Kissering is, like, he's a pretty solid sixth defenseman as far as sixth defensemen go. I'd be pretty happy if that was my sixth defenseman based on what's ahead of him too. Again, I think this defense really only lacks, as of now, that number one defenseman. And if Mikhail Sergachev can develop into that true number one, and Sean Durzi can take another, like, half step up, you're looking at, like, what could potentially be, like, a top 10 defense in the NHL. I don't think that's an over-exaggeration. And those are two big question marks, right? So those are your two best players that need to continue to get even better, which is sometimes a lot to ask. But if that can happen, like, you could be looking at a top 10 blue line pretty easy. I mean, they're tied for 12th already, so I don't think that's that crazy. But again, like I said, like, I'd probably have them closer to, like, 16th right now. If it was just, like, my own personal, like, if I was just looking at it, I guess that kind of was. But, like, if I didn't have the values of the grades to create the rankings, they'd probably be, like, 50 and 16 if I had to actually organize them 1 to 32. Without any ties, is what I'm trying to say. That was a long-winded way to do that, but yeah, I think this blue line could be super good by the end of the season. And same with the offense. Like, again, Utah's a team that could pop. If we're looking at Utah at the end of the year and they're third in the Pacific, I'd be like, yeah, sure, everything worked out. That's good. Or I guess in the Central. Arizona needs to be on the side. It's just everything. There's so many things that have changed. It's fine. I apologize. Third in the Central, I'd be like, yeah, I could see it, right? Like, a couple teams fall off, a couple teams take a step down. Maybe Winnipeg, for instance, who I still haven't talked about, is worse than we thought they'd be. Maybe Dallas takes a step back. Colorado might. not have everything figured out, right? Like there's ways that I could see Utah getting into third, maybe first wild card is more realistic. This is a team that could become a playoff team this year, and I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. In the same way that some people predicted Arizona to be hovering around a playoff spot last year too. I think the sky's the limit kind of for this team going into this season. So don't be surprised if they take a huge jump and make the playoffs. There's my prediction. There you go. There's a bold prediction for you. Let's move on to the goalies. So this goaltending tandem is tied for 17th for me right now. And first of all, let's just take a minute to appreciate what Connor Ingram did last season. He was phenomenal last season. Connor Ingram was great. And Vejmelka is somebody that Utah, or I guess Arizona last year, tried to trade a bunch, apparently. And as far as backups go, like, I think he's a fine backup. Like, I'm not mad about it at all. He's a little bit too inconsistent for me. He had the crazy run 2 years ago, and last year was kind of a down year for him, but he had spurts where he was, like, very good. So he's somebody that, like, I'm fine with as a backup, but I think he'd be better in a situation where he had a better starter in front of him. If Connor Ingram can improve on the season he had last year, like, man, like, he's a legitimate, like, true awesome starter. If he regresses a bit, which could also happen, it's been 1 year, but goalies are far more random, so I'm a lot more lenient on giving goalies a higher grade if they have a great season because of how inconsistent they can be. There's just a ton more fluctuation. So you kind of have to react quicker. You can't, like, take your time with it. Yeah, I mean, if Connor Ingram can continue to take that mantle as, like, being the starter on this team and look good, like, he's going to have the blue line in front of him. I don't think there's a ton of excuses for him, right? This isn't like a situation like maybe like on some of the bad teams, right? Like a San Jose or whatever, where the goalie's kind of getting hung out to dry. Like, he should be well protected in net. So I think overall it's a fine unit. It's good enough for where this team's at. And if Connor Ingram can take a step up, and if Vejmelka can find some consistency, and maybe these guys move up to like an A- and like a C even, it's a much stronger goaltending unit. And I have faith in that. I've liked Connor Ingram his whole career, basically. I mean, Nashville was a goalie factory, right? Like, they're pumping out starting goalies like crazy, right? So I have confidence that Connor Ingram can continue to develop and be that player that people saw playing in Milwaukee a couple years ago. And if not, maybe they trade for Askarov. I don't know. Probably not. But yeah, I think this is a strong goaltending unit. I don't think there's a lot of negatives to say about it. And overall, like, I don't have a lot of negatives to say about Utah in general. I'm super intrigued to see. I'm high on the fact that being in a new environment, being in a secure market where you have a stable owner who already owns another sports franchise, that's been pretty successful. He knows kind of what it takes to do that. He seems to be a very, like, experience first kind of owner who wants to give the fans a good time and a good experience. And I think that's such a breath of fresh air for this organization, even though it's a different organization. I know. You know what I mean. I think that's going to be such a huge relief, and it's going to be a weight off the players too, because now they don't have to deal with the jokes about like the 15-minute walk to the opposing dressing room from the rink, just stuff like that, right? Like, that all, it was funny, but it was like that weighs on players too, because it's like, this is they want to be proud of where they play, like where they work, right? It's like, so I think being in a new environment like this, being in a fun setting where you can really kind of have energy going there, and you can feel the energy of the fans being there, is going to be so much better for these players, especially with a young team. They're going to be able to feed off that quite a bit. Like, I'm fairly confident that Utah is going to be a very competitive team this year, and they're going to be very close to a playoff spot. Don't know if I'll actually predict them to fully get into a playoff spot, We'll see once I'm done this series when I do my actual like full season predictions. But for now, like I really like the direction of this team, where they're at, and I think they're gonna be pretty fun. I'm excited. I'm excited for Utah. I'm gonna miss the Kachina though. I'm not gonna lie to you. That sucks. That might be the worst part about Arizona leaving, is the Kachina jersey's gone. And Utah can't even do like a throwback jersey for it because they don't own it, because it's not their franchise. So that's unfortunate. But it also, like, how funny would it be if Utah just won the cup this year with the Utah Hockey Club name? That'd be hilarious. Like, let's live for chaos here. All right, let's do it. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. This was a shorter one, I believe, but I'm pretty overall positive on Utah. There's not a whole lot of negatives to say about this team, and it's kind of just one of those teams that we have to wait and see how everybody develops, and then we can react to it during the season. That's kind of where I'm at on Utah at this point. But let me know what you guys think of the Utah Hockey Club. Do you think they're going to be a playoff team? That's kind of the big question here. I'm going to lean towards yes, but we'll see. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe for the rest of the series so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.